Host, Jim Flyzik.
Good afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss critical issues facing government and industry leaders in securing cyberspace. With me on the show today are Colonel William Data Bryant, the Deputy Director of the Task Force Cybersecure U.S. Air Force, Dominic Cussatt, the Executive Director for Enterprise Cybersecurity Strategy at VA, Colonel Brandon Pearce, the Chief Information Security Officer at NGA, Ned Miller, the Chief Technology Strategist, Intel Security Public Sector, Joe Nestor, the Senior Business Development Manager, Tenable Network Security, George Romas, the Chief Engineer, Enterprise Security Solutions, Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Let's get into the issues. Let's talk about cybersecurity. Let's start with Colonel Bryant here. Colonel, can you tell us, give us some ideas of where you see progress being made, where you see us moving forward with addressing cybersecurity issues?
Right. We've been focused, obviously, for a number of years on IT security of traditional IT systems. Recently, we've implemented some things such as ARAD, which is an implementation that's letting us get near real-time visibility into what's actually going on with our networks down at a very low level, which has been very helpful. And also implementing Cyber Ready 365, where we're trying to shift the focus from episodic inspections, where we look at a base once every couple of years, to making sure that that base keeps a high level of cyber readiness across throughout those years. But more importantly, I think we're making some really significant strides in cyber physical systems, things such as aircraft. That a few years ago we wouldn't have even considered as part of cyberspace or wouldn't have thought much about their cybersecurity. So we have a number of programs there. The acquisition community is aggressively pursuing a number of initiatives to bake things in versus try to bolt it on later.
Right.
And we're also dealing with legacy systems and figuring out ways to defend those systems.
Yeah, boy, we've learned that lesson over and over and over again. You know, build the security in up front and don't try to bolt it on down the road. Dominic Cussatt at VA, talk a little bit about some of the progress you see being made at VA addressing some of these cybersecurity challenges.
Oh, great, thank you. I'd like to lead off by saying that at Department of Veterans Affairs, we always like to start the process by thinking about what are we doing for the veteran, what direct benefit are we arranging for the veteran in everything that we do, and we do that with cybersecurity as well.
Sure, makes sense.
It's about providing, making sure they get the benefits they need when they need them, and we protect their data in the process. So in support of that, we've established an enterprise cybersecurity strategy team that is overseeing a huge program across the VA, covering 35 different subject areas in cybersecurity, where we're making a lot of progress. We've been working on it for about a year now. We're reporting regularly to Congress on the progress that we're making. Our cybersecurity team meets with our CIO weekly to discuss the progress. And the point is that, you know, we're being very judicious about it, and the CIO is personally involved. And some of the things that we've been able to deliver recently with this effort is some enhanced continuous monitoring. We've integrated some scanning and monitoring systems we never had before. We've reduced elevated privileges by 95%. That was a real problem. We had too many people with elevated privileges, and it becomes harder to protect the data. We've fully deployed two-factor authentication for all of our remote users, which was a big change. And we are working on the internal users as well now. And we've begun installation recently of an enterprise security incident and event management system so we can better keep an eye on the network. And we've implemented a lot of controls recently to inhibit data exfiltration, because like I said, it's really about protecting the veterans' data and the VA's data.
I mean, it's a very complex subject. You know, when you break cyber, we could probably do 20 radio shows on different aspects of cybersecurity. This one's, you know, sort of like Cybersecurity 101, the big high-level view. Ned Miller, Intel Security, how are you guys positioned, and what kind of progress do you see supporting your government customer and helping address some of these issues?
Sure, Jim. In our case, as a security solutions provider, we're seeing customers make some progress in the areas of vulnerability management, perimeter security, and monitoring, as Dominic had suggested. So the fundamentals we're starting to see improve, and the ability to measure those fundamentals are now rising to the C-suite, for example. So a lot of focus on the metrics of how secure we are. So compliance continues to be one of the #1 areas where the C-suite and information security professionals are currently making some good progress there. Programs like the CDM contract vehicle through DHS is making it much easier for agencies to get access to the tools and capabilities, and more importantly, the subject matter expertise. As we all know, there's a shortage of cybersecurity professionals, and as a result, having more contract vehicles and resources, subject matter experts available, is really improving the overall posture across our government customers that we're seeing.
Yeah, I see, CDM's wonderful, especially at controlling the perimeter, but then we also have the data at rest, data at motion, the internal threat, the devices themselves.
The future phases are coming up, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on.
Email security, the whole bit. I mean, it's a complex set of issues, and then one that's difficult to say we need to do this first, because they're sort of like things are happening simultaneously. Colonel Brandon Pearce at the NGA, tell us a little bit about progress you're seeing at NGA in addressing cybersecurity challenges. I know when I think NGA, I think of you guys as being right in the middle of a lot of this stuff.
Well, we are. The director, Mr. Cardillo, and the deputy, Ms. Gordon, have given us a mission challenge to transform the way we deliver geospatial intelligence services to the government. So we're in the midst of a move to the cloud, and inside that we're learning a lot about how to apply security appropriately inside a cloud infrastructure. That mission challenge of going to the cloud and transforming the way we deliver GeoInt is pushing us on the security side to ensure that we are guardrails and not a speed bump on the way to accomplishing the mission. Our security has to enhance the way that we are able to do our mission. So we've set up some different goals of reducing the time that it will take to get an authority to operate memo from us. So we've been reducing our timeline from I think when we started it was over 100 days to get an ATO. We have a stretch goal of 1 day. Oh, wow. So that's that is definitely a stretch goal for an ATO. We're not there yet, but we're making progress toward it.
Yeah, that's good to know, though. But I mean, I remember we had the certification, accreditation, ATOs, things like that. And the problem we were running into in government is you'd be on a next generation of of a product by the time you got permission to operate, on a current generation. So that would always be a challenge.
Yeah, my personal goal is to make the security shop to be better than DMV. Right?
I like that. That's and I like your little analogy there. I agree too. Security can't be a constraint. It can be a challenge, but it shouldn't be a constraint that stops a project from moving forward. It's a challenge that needs to be overcome. George Romas of Hewlett Packard. Tell us how Hewlett Packard's positioning here to support your customer and help move forward on cybersecurity challenges.
Right. So our cybersecurity practice covers all of U.S. public sector, from state and local to civilian, federal, DoD. And I've been lucky enough to get investment from the corporation, so that for the past 4 years I've built up a team of 25 cybersecurity engineers and architects that work for me, 2 labs, and we're seeing kind of that game change of moving from compliance to the risk management framework. Right. And we mentioned the CDM program out of DHS. So really for the past 4 years we've been working on how do you integrate these different products and capabilities from companies like Intel and Tenable, so that you can move that information, get into a standard format and data model, so that you can do the risk scoring that you need to do, so that now you can get to that 1 day of ATO where you're really have all the sensors and information that you need, so that at any one point in time you can say this system is certified, because now I can look at my risk posture at any point in time, and that also gives you the ability to attach all those different assets that you own to missions. So now you take your most important missions and risks and remediate those issues first. So now you're proactively attacking the problems of threats and vulnerabilities, rather than taking one each as they come and trying to keep up with it.
Right, I like that. I think proactive's the operative word. I think, in my opinion, and by the way, I taught cybersecurity for 18 years at the graduate level at the University of Maryland on Saturdays, and my pet peeve was always that we were a reactive society. We only fixed things when they broke. We patched things when we found problems and so forth. It was the Band-Aid approach. And what I'm hearing, from this panel as well as other panels we've been doing is that we're really trying to change that and to get out there and be proactive and get in front of the problems and stop them before they happen. So that's pleasant to hear. Joe Nestor over at Tenable, tell us a little bit about what you're doing in terms of some of the progress you see being made in this space.
Sure. I'm pulling the thread on some of the things that have already been discussed here today. Actually, the story I want to tell is one about a type of support we're providing to an intelligence community customer who shall remain nameless. What we've managed to do, and it was leveraging our technology security platform in collaboration with an integrator actually, and in the collective, they built some really interesting innovations on top of our platform, and we're actually today delivering near real-time visibility against RMF compliance and all the things we've discussed here, reducing the time to ATO. All that is actually occurring in this environment. We're very, very excited about it. Now we're looking at how we take those successes and how do we get it out to more customers throughout the various communities that we support. And then one other thing we've actually done in that environment as well, some of the additional challenging systems, assets, et cetera, like in the ICS SCADA realm. We're actually able to leverage technology and this integrated workforce to provide vulnerability assessments and vulnerability insights against those sorts of systems too, what I'll call non-traditional IT systems. So a lot of exciting innovation done through partnership, through leveraging platforms in an optimized way. And so again, this is the kind of thing we're looking to now scale from here to broader customer sets throughout the federal government.
Yeah, good points too there about non-traditional IT things. I know we've been a lot of energy around the Internet of Things and what that's going to mean and security for the Internet of Things. We've actually branched out and now are going to donate some radio shows to that subject because it's gaining so much attention across the news lines. Let's talk about lessons we're learning. What are some of the things we're learning as we address these issues? What are things that you guys would perhaps pass on to others that are addressing? Let's start with Dominic Cussatt from VA. What are some of the lessons, Dominic, you think you're learning along the way here that are useful for others that are working these same issues?
To sort of pull a thread you were mentioning earlier, proactive versus reactive, we're finding with the enterprise cybersecurity strategy that we're implementing that crosses, as I mentioned earlier, 35 cybersecurity areas. We have that decomposed into a couple of thousand line items in an integrated master schedule. And we're finding that this is giving us the time to proactively look at things and do it the right way. And as was mentioned earlier, build it in versus bolting it on. And then that's, getting that done right so that the automated systems and procedures we're putting in place to do the cybersecurity right is allowing us the time to focus more attention on the incidents that do occur so that we're not always scrambling, to try and keep up with an ever-changing threat and vulnerability and ever-changing technology. So, I'd say, having a good integrated strategy to address cybersecurity, having senior level buy-in with within your organizations that you're going to get the support across. We all know cybersecurity cross-cuts everything that we do in all of our agencies.
Absolutely.
We need all the senior leaders and all those pillars within those agencies aligned to say, yes, this is important. This is going to help us achieve our mission. This isn't just about securing things for the sake of security. We got to protect our data that we're the stewards for the American people. So this has to be looked at as something that's going to enable them and enable mission success.
Yeah, what I'm picking up from you there is you need to talk in the language that's going to resonate. You got to talk about risk, reducing risk, and what it really means to the veteran, those kind of things. I know in the private sector, for studies after studies, CEOs are concerned with what? They're concerned with reducing their cost, generating revenues, stockholder equity, and then you throw security in there, and how does that help those three things? Well, it costs money, and it's a hard sell. But on the other hand, you're selling risk reduction and trust trusted organizations. I mean, I think if you're seen as having good security, you'll be seen in the future being a trusted organization. Colonel Pearce, what do you think at NGA? What are some of the lessons you're learning as you work your way through these issues?
Well, as we've been going through our transformation to push GeoInt services out to all of our customers, both intelligence customers as well as the federal, state, local, tribal customers that we have. We're looking at our workforce and ensuring that they have the right skill sets to be able to take us to that next level. Unlike private sector, you can't just dump someone simply because they don't have the right skill set. So you're going to need to train them. You're going to need to get the right folks in at the right time. And it impacts your hiring strategies. You're going to have a natural set of attrition. But we have been fortunate to be able to be here on the East Coast and have a good workplace where we actually have most of the folks that we need. We're still looking for individuals to apply specifically for cybersecurity. We're looking for the folks that understand how cyber can impact the mission. I don't need someone who can simply type in hex. Right. I need someone who can actually communicate with the rest of the world on what their idea is.
Yeah, that's a tough issue. Every show we've done on cybersecurity, we've talked about the shortage of skills and the competition for skills and so forth. And, it seems like everybody has some, star players on that starting lineup, but having depth on the bench is sometimes a problem. To have someone to come in when you need somebody to chip in, it's a much more difficult task. Colonel Bryant, what do you think in terms of some of the lessons you're learning as you work your way through?
Yeah, I think there are two main lessons that really stand out to me.
Okay.
The first is a consistent theme from what you've already heard, and the importance of focusing on the mission. I really don't care if an adversary hacks a box if we get the mission done anyway. And there are multiple pathways and multiple systems, and it may involve a pad of paper and a pencil and a backup system. But the point is the mission, not the system, not the box, not the IT. And that also kind of feeds into the second major lesson learned for us, which is the immense importance of culture. And we're not just talking about culture of the user community. That's one issue, that we have to basically change the way everyone in the Air Force thinks about IT. They think about plugging in an unauthorized device. They're not just charging an iPhone. They're potentially introducing weapons into the Air Force network that could have tremendous effects down the road. So we have to change the way people think about that. But even within the IT or cyber community itself, we see three different cultures. You've got the traditional IT community, you've got the acquisition community, and you've got the cyber operations community. They all look at defending cyberspace in different ways. For the traditional IT folks, they focus on IT-based defense in depth. The acquisition community focuses on resiliency and building resilient systems. And the cyber operators generally focus on active defense or continuous monitoring and response and those type of things. Obviously, what we've learned is all three elements are important. You've got to combine all three in supporting ways, because if any piece of that is missing, the others can't make up for that.
Yeah, excellent. I like your comment too about thinking about what really is important to be fixed. I remember being, when I was at Treasury briefing Secretary Rubin at the time, there were a bunch of hacks of websites that were just the front-facing websites. And I said to the Secretary, it's bad that, if somebody messes up our front-facing website, but there's no data there. There's nothing operational. There's no critical data. We'll fix that in minutes. We'll address that, but let's not put all our money there. Let's put our money where the real problems can be and the things that we really need to be concerned about. I want to hear from our industry guests on the same subject, but we first need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Colonel Bryant from the U.S. Air Force, Dominic Cussatt from VA, Colonel Pearce from NGA, Ned Miller from Intel Security Public Sector, Joe Nestor from Tenable Network Security. And George Romas from Hewlett Packard Enterprise. We're talking cybersecurity. When we went to break, we heard from our government guest here some of the lessons they're learning. Let's hear what our private sector guests have to say. Let's start with Joe Nestor over at Tenable. Joe, what are some of the lessons you're learning as you work through these cybersecurity matters?
Sure, Jim. I actually want to just jump on something the Colonel talked about, defense in depth. What we have observed over years in the space is significant challenges with defense in depth. Specifically, we've sort of noticed this evolution from prevention tools such as antivirus to detection capabilities such as anti-malware, and now we've got detection tools such as SIMs. And with each in an environment, there's what we would call sort of the illusion of security, but the intrinsic challenge is we continue to see issues. So our emphasis from here and moving forward, and our contention would be that integration is the critical component, right? So whether or not you have these best-of-breed tools for a specific function, if they're not integrated and working effectively, then individual stakeholders might feel as if they're delivering a secure posture to their organization, but there's intrinsic challenges with that. And in addition, the perimeter itself is fading. It's changing, right? We're in a commercial space where they're all in on cloud. The government's certainly looking that way. A lot more around applications and rapid delivery to the client, but that is leading also to undetected, unmonitored, unmaintained assets, right? So again, integration is a critical component, and we've sort of taken the cybersecurity problem and broken it into sort of three critical pillars: complete visibility, the critical context associated with information coming out of all these, best-of-breed tools, and then all that helping to inform decisive action to our end mission users. But yeah, I think defense in depth in and of itself, great concept, but that integration is our focus. That's the key, I think, moving forward.
Excellent. Ned Miller over at Intel. What do you see, Ned, in terms of some of the lessons you're learning?
Jim, from the solutions provider perspective, the areas that we're seeing, and I have to echo some of our government colleagues on the panel today, establishing a culture of IT security becoming part of the mission, not an afterthought, where those organizations adopt that particular theory, methodology, et cetera, and create that culture and sense of urgency around IT security, we see that as a best practice consistently. Where that's missing or there's gaps as you go through the organization, if you have very diverse organizations with lots of different responsibilities, if that's not a clear, consistent message to the rank and file, it becomes a challenge, obviously. It stalls in terms of that overall culture. The second area is where organizations have a written plan that crosses all the organizational boundaries, that clearly identifies milestones and objectives, and it's measured often across the organization. That true sense of accountability that, again, becomes part of the overall culture itself. Right. So when we see organizations have adopted the culture and they have a written plan and they consistently measure against it, we see pretty significant progress in the area of network defense.
Yeah, it's actually a very good point. Nobody likes to do the paperwork side of it, anything, but on the other hand, if you don't have the rules of engagement documented somewhere, then you're sort of making them up as you go along.
Exactly.
What I mean? George Romas, what do you think some of the lessons learned over at HP Enterprise?
Yeah, so as we've gone through the integration of these various products to get to an end goal, it's really all about the data. I'll throw some acronyms at you. These different products come out with CSV files, JSON, REST, XML. So how do you make sense of all that different information, normalize it, and get into a form that will allow you to do risk scoring, analysis of logs, apply it to mission. So really it's all about that data and what you do with it, how you transform it, and get it to the right places that you need to establish your mission and achieve your goals. And I say we're moving from defense in depth to defense in context, where where's the information coming from? Is the person that is accessing information on a mobile device? What's their location? What applications are they accessing? Is it according to typical behaviors? So now we're getting into more behavioral analytics. So it's forming that data repository that you can do cybersecurity from, that you need to establish.
Yeah, very good points. Great points there. Defense in depth to defense in context, or data. It's all about the data. All about that data. Let's talk a little bit about priorities. What are some of the things now we think are priorities? Let's go back to Colonel Bryant. Colonel, what do you think are sort of the priorities right now on your plate? What's important to get to be doing now?
I think the most important thing we have to do is going back to changing the culture. If we're unsuccessful at that, we won't, none of the specific programs we're putting in place will survive over the long term. So we have to make that connection in all of our airmen's minds between the things that they do in cyberspace and the mission. And I think that's slowly changing over time as generations change. We're also launching a pretty aggressive communications campaign across the Air Force, Cyber Safe campaign that kind of aligns with some of the things we've done in the past with things like aviation safety or ground safety, kind of following down that road of cultural change. I think that's the hardest thing we have to do.
Yeah, that's excellent. And it's exciting you brought that up. We've done 140 radio shows. The word culture has entered 140 radio shows. We always get to, technology is one thing, culture's another, but the culture has to be addressed. So thanks for bringing that up. But Dominic, Cussatt, what are some of the priorities you see right now? What are things that are sort of like in the front burner for you right now?
So to continue to beat the drum on it's about the data discussion, for us at Department of Veterans Affairs, data is, the protection of data is very important to us. We have very sensitive data for personally identifiable information for our veterans, and we do a lot of medical care, as you know, so there's a lot of sensitive medical records there. So in order, that's a high priority for us. So in light of that, we're looking to achieve 100% personal identity verification or PIV compliance within the next year. We'd really like to get that nailed down because you cannot protect your data unless you know who's on your network and where they're going on your network. So that's high on the list for us. And then the second thing I'd mention is we'd like to make some significant progress over the next year on continuous diagnostics and mitigation. So continuous monitoring is very important. We used to, when I was at DoD, there was the notion of accredit and forget it, and we don't want to do that.
Yeah, right.
You're not in the clear once you authorize the system. You need to keep an eye on it. You need to continually monitor your security posture. So we're working very closely with Department of Homeland Security. DHS is doing some wonderful things in CDM to pre-flight some services for us and get some products and capabilities out to some of the through the interagency, and we're really appreciative of that and enjoying working with them.
Yeah, we've had the DHS folks on a couple times with their CDM program. You're exactly right. It's programs like that are necessary to help across government. Colonel Pearce, what are some of the lessons learned, or the priorities rather, for you for this year? What's on your sort of front burner for the year?
Well, with answering our challenge to move to the cloud, the culture of the developer is changing across the software development all across the globe. You're going into away from the traditional waterfall delivery methods to DevOps. As we're going into the DevOps deliveries, our priority is to make sure that our developers understand that every time they go to commit code, they need to test that code. Because if I can get the test, and I'll never make my ATO in a day goal unless they are testing all the way through while they're bringing their platform to fruition. They should not be surprised when they come to security for an ATO as to whether or not that will pass. It's an open book test. They know what we're going to test them on, and we're giving them the tools to do the tests as they go along. So that's one of our priorities, is to increase the security baked in during that DevOps process. Another of our priorities with going to the web is to increase, or I'm sorry, going to the cloud is to reutilize as much as we can within the way the risk management framework says to share that accreditation documentation. Just because someone has it on that level of security fabric in one place doesn't mean that everyone can, because their installations differ, but we can reduce our testing and be able to only test the deltas between those installations.
Right.
So those two things, I think, on very specific in the cybersecurity arena, will assist us to getting a quicker push to our mission accomplishment goal of transforming the way that we deliver GON services.
Yeah, excellent. I know there are a lot of standards being developed too around DevOps and quality and security testing and things like that hopefully can keep things moving quickly. Absolutely. You know, be big. Ned Miller, what do you think? What are some of the priorities? What's on that front burner for you and Intel?
Yes, Jim. So there's a few as it relates to how we're trying to help our government customers with prioritizing the next thing that's coming in cybersecurity. And as we look at the horizon, we're very focused on orchestration and automation, right? So as we see that trend line going into the balance of this year and into next year, the overall attempt to improve an organization's security efficacy, their posture over time, and also improve efficiency. And the way in which we're looking at it is by advancing the ability to share cyber threat intelligence information across an organization's cyber defensive grid in an automated fashion. Think of it as sharing threat intelligence data at the machine-to-machine level,
right,
which will allow those individual machines, those purpose-built decision support systems, to react to the threats in near real time. Our objective there is to help our customers detect, respond, and correct that cycle in milliseconds versus hours, days, weeks, months.
Right.
So if we can do that, we can improve the overall efficacy and efficiency of their overall security systems
all
themselves.
about continuous improvement. I know Dominic brought it up. I remember way back when, years ago when I was there, you know, FSMA was the big thing, and you know, it was sort of like a cut and paste exercise. Let's look at what we reported on FSMA last year. We'll cut and paste that and see what we need to update this year, send that in, and we'll, you know, and then that, to me, that was that was not what I would call proactive security. We're not really fixing anything. We're doing a report.
Exactly.
George Romas, what do you think are some of the priorities that are out there right now that need to be addressed?
Right, so from our point of view, we're looking at kind of two different paths. One is kind of following the CDM phases and bringing in the next types of products like identity and access management, credential privilege management, things like that. Again, figuring out how to bring that data and information into the overall security architecture, but then also extending that. We actually have a military customer that's looking at cyber defense situational awareness. So now, not just risk scoring of your enterprise, but bringing in assets from the battlefield, people and equipment, and how they link up to missions. And if there's a cyber attack or threat, how does that affect not only your IT assets, but people out in the field? So that's one avenue that we're pushing forward. And then the other is most vulnerabilities come from software. And there's lots of tools out there to do that scanning. There's people that review code, but we actually have a process we call comprehensive application threat assessment, where you actually look from the beginning of the requirement of what's the architecture to support that application, what's the platform, and what are the vulnerabilities and threats from that point. Remediate those first. Make sure that you have a secure architecture and platform, and then once you start developing code, start using humans and code scanners like Fortify to evaluate the code as you get through test and then to production.
I love that. You know, I think a lot of people have, you know, like code scanning devices, but to me, you got to look at the system security, because, you know, just looking at lines of code is doing nothing if you're not looking at how it impacts on the overall complete system architecture. Joe Nestor at Tenable, what do you think are some of the priorities that you have out there today that need to be addressed?
Sure, Jim. Right out of the gate, I think we're very focused organizationally on how the environments are changing, right? So we recognize in the federal government that on-prem solutions are here for the next long while, so we're going to ensure that we're continuing to service those missions, but also looking at cloud environments and how we can focus on asset services applications and helping secure those in historic legacy systems, future cloud systems, and again, some of these hard to reach, non-traditional ICS SCADA type systems as well. So very focused on how the market's changing and how we're positioning there. The other big piece is I talked about integration earlier. Partnership is a critical component of our future. We've always put heavy emphasis on partnering with other technologies and tools. We're also really really focused on, I mentioned that IC success story in the past, this integrator community, those who own the mission. So either direct with clients or with the integrator community, like the CDM program so brilliantly sort of forced, that there is that integration before we're present in an environment, meaning we're building those solutions together on the front end. This is a community of individuals that really understand the domain, the knowledge and expertise that is critical to leverage on top of a tool to ensure the tool's optimized and the mission needs are met. And so in a nutshell, the future for us is pretty simple, right? We're looking to be a platform, help you establish your baseline, but then at the end of the day, we really want partnership to help drive meaningful add-ons, plugins, enhancements of the baseline to ensure that mission is the key priority and that its mission successes are driven very, very rapidly.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think, you know, you have some companies, they have their suite of products or whatever, but it sounds to me like you're looking at, we're looking for best of breed, and we'll work with whomever has best of breed.
Better together.
There you go, better together. I like that. Let's, Colonel Pearce, what are some of the big challenges you face every day? Some of the tough stuff yet that you still need to get over that hurdle to get where you want to go?
Right. Well, we've mentioned culture several times,
Absolutely.
right? And culture is tied to the human beings that we work with. And getting folks to not believe that Redskin tickets are free and clicking on that link, that type of thing, right? People wouldn't continue to spearfish if it didn't work. Right. So the understanding what the risks are and educating our absolute base across our entire workforce. I mean, we've got over 14,500 people inside NGA that are working to do the right thing, but they make mistakes too. So we've got to make sure that the computers work for them and not against them. That if they make a mistake in security, that we have postured ourselves so that we can catch it, so that that mistake doesn't become a liability. Because as an Intel community partner, trust is the #1 thing that we have. If I lose trust in our organization and people don't trust the navigational charts, if people don't trust the arrow charts, if they don't trust the data that we have, we lose. So that's where we're going to focus on that base education across the board, because rising tide lifts all the boats. So that's going to help us provide better services in the future.
If you want a trustworthy organization, you first need to have trustworthy people and build that trust. So that's an excellent point. I want to hear from our other panelists on this same subject, but we're going to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Colonel Bryant from the U.S. Air Force, Dominic Cussatt from VA, Colonel Pearce from NGA, Ned Miller from Intel Security Public Sector, Joe Nestor from Tenable Network Security, and George Romas from Hewlett Packard Enterprise. We're talking cybersecurity. When we went to break, we were talking about some of the challenges that are out there. Let's hear from our other government guest. Colonel Bryant, what are some of the big challenges that you face every day that you need to overcome to get where you want to go with cybersecurity?
Well, Jim, I've already talked about culture twice, so I guess I'll pass on that, but that's probably, again, like the other panelists, that's one of our major issues. So I'll talk briefly about cyber-physical systems. Securing a legacy thing like an aircraft is an immensely difficult problem. If you look at something like an F-16, every connection that passes data and every aperture or antenna with a processor behind it is a potential entry point. Wow. So once you start drawing out that attack surface, it's immense. And going back to something that first flew in 1979 and figuring out a way to secure it when in 1979 this whole cyberspace thing was not even a concept on anybody's mind is a real challenge, and that's something that that we're working really hard on, as well as it's much easier in some ways to build that into a new system like the new bomber that's being developed than it is to go back and stick it into something that's been around since the 70s.
Wow, yeah, I can understand that. I had not invented the internet yet back in the 1970s. Dominic, Cussatt, what are some of the challenges that you see in front of you and things that you believe need to be overcome to get where you want to go?
So I'll piggyback a little on Colonel Bryant's comment. The Department of Veterans Affairs has a very large and complex infrastructure providing medical care to veterans all over the United States. And legacy technology is an issue for us as well because we're talking about very proprietary medical device systems and medical systems used to keep people alive and do procedures on patients. So there's a picture that I often share when I'm trying to explain the issue to people of a vital signs monitor that was in my son's hospital room when he was in the hospital for a procedure, and it has the blue screen of death on it. I think you all know what that is, right?
Yeah, we've
so
all experienced that.
The system had crashed, and sometimes people just don't realize, business owners, mission owners don't realize that these devices are running typical operating system software that are used on many IT. So we need to be vigilant, and we need to address. We can't just forget these legacy things that are sitting out there. And for instance, VA has recently increased our cybersecurity funding to $370 million to really modernize our cybersecurity expenditure to address things like this.
Wow. Yeah, I think, the blue screen of death when it's a medical procedure could be a little scary to think about. Ned Miller, what do you think? What are some of the challenges that you see that need to be overcome to get where we need to be?
So, Jim, oftentimes I wear a consultative hat in my role for a lot of the C-level agency executives as well as information security officers, and the range falls under the category of people, process, and technology. I won't say the culture word, but we could call it layer 8, if you will.
That's
so
right.
The layer 8 problem oftentimes exists. It can range from the way in which we contract for technology and services. It creates challenges because it crosses organizational boundaries, and we don't always have consistency in terms of understanding whose responsibility cybersecurity really is, because it can cross 4 or 5 different groups.
Exactly right.
In terms of technology areas that are challenges going forward, with the entrant of, as the Colonel mentioned, whether you want to call it network of things or Internet of Things, these new areas of responsibility are starting to raise concern at the C-level across organizations, different agencies, et cetera, that are starting to look at these as potential new threat vectors. And then finally, I think it really comes down to interoperability, right? At the end of the day, the largest challenge most organizations have is we tend to be very reactive to the threat of the day, and oftentimes will overreact and invest in additional tools. In the industry, we call it tool sprawl. As Joe mentioned, we work very diligently to provide as much integration between our capabilities as possible so that we don't put the burden on the customer. That still exists today in the agencies themselves. They've acquired technologies over the years that then forces them to become their own systems integrator, and they don't always get the results they want. So I still see that as a challenge today. Interoperability going forward, though, is a key area that we're working on. I know Joe and his organization is working on, and we're trying to standardize the method by which tools actually communicate with one another.
Yeah, excellent points. I mean, interoperability has been around for a long, long time in terms of a challenge, and standards help and things like that, but we still have a long way to go on a number of these things, especially when we get into the Internet of Things and start integrating all this stuff. We want to switch and spend the last minutes we have available talking about where we think this is all going, what the future looks like. So I'm going to start with Joe Nestor at Tenable Network Security. I'm going to say, share your vision for the future. Are we going to get to a point where we're proactive enough and out in front of these cyber attacks that we don't have to be so nervous like we are today, where we hear a breach, and there's attack, and the foreign governments are in the U.S. computers, and are we going to get in front of that someday?
So I think it's a great question, Jim. One of the questions was asked recently to this vein was prevention. Are we ever going to be able to totally prevent cyber attacks? I think the short answer to that is complete prevention, no. But genuinely believe that the technology today across the board is pretty solid, right? The challenge is, again, it has to work together in a meaningful way so that it's no longer fruitful for an attacker to undertake a cyber attack. And so I think the future successful state looks more like that, where everything in an environment is integrated, the culture changes, the barriers are torn down. The technology piece, we'll get there as an industry if led by the organization saying this is what you need to do, industry is going to follow that. They're going to follow that advice, and we're going to get there fairly rapidly. So I think that the answer I have for you is once we get to that place where we're all tackling this problem in a holistic way instead of in individual silos, I think the technology can quickly follow, and we'll get to a point where it's just simply not worth it to go through the pain of hacking into an environment because you're not going to get anything fruitful out of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, and the best thing we got going for us, I think, right now is cybersecurity has made it as a national issue. It's a priority. If you go back 10 years, people had the attitude, well, it won't happen to me. You know, it's not going to happen to me. Well, it's happening to everybody now. So I think the mental set is changed completely. And I mean, you had the President of the United States talking about cybersecurity in national speeches. So, I mean, I think the table is a different set of cards out there now.
And if I may add one last thing
Sure.
to that end, because we do have a commercial business as well, and I would say it's also an issue that the boardrooms are talking about. So the good news is it's not just a federal government issue at all. I think commercially everyone is at the same place, and so there's a really interesting opportunity, and maybe industry is a great place to
You're
leverage
right.
all those lessons learned.
And I think in the boardroom, my point I made earlier is the risk factor.
Absolutely.
That if we're not seen as having good security, we will not be a trusted organization.
Absolutely.
People want to do business with us in the future. George Romas, what do you think? What's your crystal ball look like? Where's this all going?
Right. So what do we need in terms of information to predict and prevent these attacks from happening and support that defense in context? So it's not just cybersecurity data from these different tools and scanners and data on the internet, National Vulnerability Database. It's unstructured text. It's what's happening on social media. It's big data and analytics. So how do we the idea is bringing that information in and making sense of it. The intelligence community has done that for many years. What's the needle in the haystack? So what's the threat amongst all this data and information that I have and I can analyze and make sense out of. So it's getting that in one place in a model that I can understand and apply to the different cultures, different missions of all these different agencies. Because, like I said before, we support everything from state and local to federal, DoD, civilian. They all have different aspects and points of view on what they need to protect, how they protect it, what their budgets are. So how do we collate all that and coalesce into a way to do defense in context?
Yeah, I know the phrase I like is it used to be finding the needle in the haystack. It's now becoming finding the needle in a stack of needles. Because with the big data analytics, that's an excellent point to bring up. Colonel Pearce, what do you say? What's it look like down the road to you?
I see a bit of pressure on cyber organizations as a whole to get their budgets in line. Right. Right now, you could say that we're on the wrong side of the budget equation, where we seem to be spending more and more for security. So we're going to have to take some pretty differing views of the way that we do business. I believe that those are all doable. But for example, right now we're giving out a token card with PKI certificates that are valid for multiple years. Yeah. So if I instead give out, dynamically give out those PKI certificates and they're only good for 20 minutes, what does that do? What are the implications? Well, it means that as an attacker, if I've compromised those, I only have 20 minutes to actually use that. But what's the impact on the back end? What are the other things, the infrastructure that I need to incorporate those? So I think that if we're going to have to take some very different views on security to enable us to hit those targets for the budget and be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar.
Excellent points, excellent points. We've had discussions on the show about derived credentials, things that can be used, for a short period of time, and they're valid and can be used in different scenarios. Ned Miller, what's it look like to you from the Intel point of view? What's it look like down the road to you?
Sure. Using your terminology, the crystal ball. So
Okay.
I would look at, in the near term, I mentioned automation orchestration earlier. I think we will see systems become more efficient, being able to leverage automation to help address the skills shortage and just the sheer volume of threat data. So we'll see additional tools and capabilities help customers adopt more automation in their overall environments. The second area, as George pointed out, around big data, a little bit further out in maybe the 12 to 18 month range, we'll see systems that can not only rationalize big data, but indicators of compromise well in advance, being able to take advantage of listening on the wire and building these large data repositories to help systems become more prescriptive. So you'll see simulations where of the attack we can actually reconstruct it and then become more prescriptive of how to defend against it. And then finally, I think that hopefully in the not too distant future, we will see systems that are more resilient to attacks, meaning if you consider time as a variable, and if we want to change the attack surface, wouldn't it be interesting if we could change the network on a time sequence that we choose? Therefore, the attacker's ability to compromise the asset exponentially increases because we keep changing the target.
Excellent.
Right?
Excellent.
So I think over time we'll see that. We'll finally start to see the ability for the defender to get the advantage back if we can ultimately, as an industry, come together and be able to achieve that goal.
Yeah, I like that. I like that resiliency idea. Dominic, Cussatt, what do you see down the road here?
So I really do think we can get to the point where we're more proactive. We oftentimes forget the cybersecurity basics. They're well documented. NIST has done a great job to document for us in the federal government what needs to be done to provide the most basic cybersecurity protections. So if we can focus on some of the basics, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, that we can work with our industry partners to implement some automated solutions, some things that will take care of that for us, so we can move our attention to being more proactive and to addressing the more sophisticated threats that are coming down the pike. I really do think we can get there.
Yeah, get out of the firefighting mode and get into the addressing the strategies that we need to put in place. Colonel Bryant, what's it look like to you down the road? Where's this all going?
Well, when I look in my crystal ball, maybe 5 to 10 years out, I think I see 3 main trends.
Okay.
One is I think the culture will be fixed. I think it's going to be so obvious that 5 to 10 years from now, we won't be sitting around talking about culture. People will understand. And they may not always do the right thing, but that won't be the issue that it is today. Secondly, I think I see tools switching from blocking bad to allowing good. You mentioned the cost of defense, and we're in a spiral right now that's just not sustainable. And there are lots of approaches out there. There are lots of people in industry looking at it. I think somebody is going to solve the whitelisting problem. Somebody is going to come up with an effective way to only allow good on a system, which very much shifts the terrain in favor of the defender. But one thing that won't change is adversaries are still going to respond to that. You can look at strategic writings from hundreds or thousands of years ago, Sun Tzu, Musashi, Clausewitz, they all say the same thing. The enemy will always respond. So if we shift our tools to allowing good and have a whitelisting solution, that's not the answer. You know, the enemy will respond, the enemy will go after that solution. You know, there is no final answer to cybersecurity any more than there is a final answer to theft, or there's a final answer to land warfare. You know, the enemy will respond, it will change, and we will still have dynamic response back and forth between attackers and defenders.
Excellent. You know, it's that thing about, you know, like virus scanners and things like that. The bad guys know what the software is too, and so they buy it and they're looking for how do I get around it each time. Let me try to do a quick summary here. We've had some great content here today. And talking about progress, we talked a little bit about getting more real-time visibility, faster, getting things ATO'd quicker. We talked about the complexity and the fact that when you talk about cybersecurity, you have to address a whole series of things. I think we talked about 35 different steps over there at the VA. We talked about cloud challenges, and then we also said that you can't view security as a constraint. It's a challenge, but it can't be, you know, stop the program. Lessons learned, we talked about getting more proactive versus reactive. We talked about the need for skilled resources and how it's a very competitive area to do that. We talked a lot about focusing on mission, that we're not just doing this for the sake of information security, we're doing this to address the risk of the mission. We talked about the fact that all people need to be involved. The whole organization needs to be involved in this subject. This isn't just about, the IT folks. This is a responsibility for everybody. And we talked about defense in depth and defense in context as things that need to be looked at across the full scope. When we talk priorities, culture jumped out there, as it always does, getting the culture to understand these risks. We talked about sensitivities and looking at the sensitive data that needs to be protected, understanding what needs to be protected first. We talked about authentication being important. If we can get the authentication piece done and authenticate 100%, then we can worry about the privilege that goes with that authentication as a secondary subject matter. We talked about continuous improvement. It's not about, a snapshot today. It's about continually staying on top of it. And we talked about testing being system testing. We're not talking about just a line of code. It's a system. Challenges, we had the complexity of the legacy systems that are out there. We talked about the challenges of interoperability, and we've got a lot of systems go back. I know the Colonel brought up, we got things back to the 1970s. They're still out there, so it creates those complexities. Future, we talked about big data, resiliency, more proactivity, and allowing the good versus blocking the bad. With that, I want to first thank our panelists for taking time from their busy schedules. I know you all have very, very busy schedules, and for you to take time to come out and talk to our listening audience and share your thoughts with us and help the community move along. I want to thank our sponsors, without which we don't have a program. So thanks to the sponsors for sponsoring our show. Thanks to the good people here at Federal News Radio that do such a good job accommodating our show each month. And finally, and most importantly, thanks to our listening audience that tune in to the show each month. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM.